There's a moment, and I think most people who have lived long enough on the outer rim know exactly what I'm talking about, where the silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling like it's waiting for something. I'd been on Selim Station for 11 months when I first saw him. 11 months of recycled air, of viewport glass fogged by temperature differentials, of drinking synthetic coffee that tasted like someone had described real coffee to a machine, and then let the machine try its best. 11 months of watching cargo freighters dock and undock like slow mechanical breathing, of sleeping in a bunk that was 6 inches too short, of talking to people who were always leaving. Everyone on the frontier is always leaving. That's the thing nobody tells you before you sign the posting papers. They say adventure and discovery and the edge of known space, and all of that's technically true. But what they leave out is the specific ache of watching the docking bay doors slide open and close, and knowing that every face that walks through is just passing through you on the way to somewhere else. My name is Sierra Maddox, Lieutenant, 2nd grade, assigned to Selim Station's Civilian Oversight Division, which in practice meant I handled disputes between traders, monitored the habitat rings for code violations, and occasionally talked someone down from a bad decision made in one of the 3 licensed drinking establishments the station permitted. It wasn't glamorous. I'd known that going in. But I'd also been running from something, and the outer rim is very good at putting distance between you and whatever it is you're running from. I just hadn't counted on the distance feeling so permanent. The day I met Commander Elan Vasek, I was standing at my usual spot near the 3rd observation ring, a hexagonal corridor of reinforced transparent steel that looked directly out onto the Selim Drift, which is what the locals called the asteroid field that spread across the space between us and the next inhabited system. Early morning shift, before the station fully woke up, when the lighting was still on its dim amber cycle, and most of the foot traffic was just maintenance crews, and the occasional bleary-eyed freighter pilot who'd landed at 2 in the morning and couldn't sleep. I came here to think or not think, depending on the day. The drift looked different every time, the slow rotation of the rocks, the way the distant sun caught their edges and turned them copper and amber, and sometimes this deep bruised violet that you don't really have a word for until you've seen it. I'd started calling it driftlight in my own head, a word I'd invented for a color that didn't have one yet. I heard his boots before I saw him. Distinct sound, military issue, Galactic Union standard, a heavier sole than the civilian treads, a particular cadence that you develop after enough years of walking corridors exactly like this one. I didn't turn around. People came and went. That was the rule of the rim. But then he stopped. Right next to me. Not close enough to be intrusive, but close enough that his presence registered, like a change in air pressure, something your body notices before your brain does. I glanced sideways. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not dramatically tall, but the kind of tall where you notice it without quite knowing why, something in the proportion of him against the corridor, against the viewport. He was in a uniform I didn't immediately recognize, which was unusual because after 11 months you learn the insignia of every service division that passes through. Dark gray with a deep navy collar and a single emblem on the left shoulder that I'd have to look up later. 2 interlocked rings around a central star. His hair was dark, cut short but not severe, and there was a tiredness in his face that wasn't just about sleep deprivation. I know what sleep deprivation looks like. This was older than that. He was looking at the drift. Not glancing. Looking. The way you look at something when you're not really seeing it, when your eyes are pointing outward but your thoughts are somewhere several light years behind. I turned back to the viewport. We stood there for maybe 3 minutes without saying a word. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Does it ever feel like it's breathing?" I didn't pretend I hadn't heard him. Out here, you don't. People talk to strangers differently on the frontier. There's less performance of it. The drift, I said. All of it, he said. The station, the space. He stopped, seemed to search for the word and not find it. All of it. Sometimes, I said, in the early shift especially, something about the lighting. He nodded once, slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd been half hoping wasn't true. Commander Elan Vasek, he said, not extending a hand, just offering the name the way you offer it out here, as information, not ceremony. 7th Galactic Boundary Fleet, temporarily detached from active service. Sierra Maddox, I said, civilian oversight, permanent enough to feel permanent. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. How long have you been stationed here? He asked. 11 months. He looked at me then, actually looked the way he'd been looking at the drift. You came out here on purpose. I did. Running towards something or away from it. I thought about lying. Out on the rim you generally don't. Away, I said, you. He looked back at the viewport. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore, he said. At a certain speed, running toward and running away end up in the same place. I didn't have an answer for that. Not immediately. So I just stood there with it, the way you stand with something that's heavier than you expected, and eventually he said, I'm sorry. That was, he made a small gesture with one hand, dismissed himself from his own sentence. No, I said, it was honest. He looked at me again. This time the something adjacent to a smile became slightly more defined, still not a full smile. Still held back like it was on probation, but there. Honest, he repeated. I haven't been accused of that recently. Is it an accusation out where you come from? Depends who's listening, he said. And that was how it started. Not with anything dramatic. Not with a rescue or a crisis or a moment of electric recognition. Just two people standing at a viewport in the amber light of the early shift, watching rocks drift through space, saying true things to each other because there was no particular reason not to. I found out later, not from him, from the station's incoming personnel manifest, that Commander Vasek had been on medical and psychological hold following an incident called the Viridian Passage engagement. I didn't know what that was at first. I looked it up. It took me 40 minutes to read the official summary and another 2 hours to read what wasn't in the official summary, which you can always find if you know where to look. People talk. Data moves. The frontier may be remote, but information about catastrophes travels faster than light. The Viridian Passage had been a battle, a bad one. The 7th Boundary Fleet had been ambushed by a Keth separatist force in a compressed transit corridor, one of those narrow runs through asteroid-dense space where your sensor radius drops to almost nothing and you're navigating half by calculation and half by nerve. The ambush had been coordinated, executed with a precision that suggested planning over months. Of the 9 ships in the convoy, 4 had been destroyed. The others had sustained severe damage. Casualties were classified, but the number I found in an analyst's summary that hadn't been fully scrubbed was somewhere above 200. Commander Vasek had been in command of the lead vessel. He'd survived. He'd brought 3 ships out. The official report called it exceptional tactical leadership under extreme duress. What the report didn't say, what the analyst's addendum did, was that he'd spent 6 days in the wreckage corridor afterward, coordinating rescue operations, personally directing 2 shuttle retrieval runs into active debris fields, that he hadn't slept, that when they'd finally pulled him aboard the recovery vessel, he'd been holding a piece of hull plating with both hands and they hadn't been able to explain to him, at first, that it was over. He was here because someone, somewhere up the command chain, had decided that the 7th Frontier outpost at Sealam was about as far from everything as you could get while still being technically active duty. That the best thing for a man who had been through what he'd been through was distance. I understood that reasoning. I'd applied it to myself once. I also understood, in a way I couldn't quite articulate to anyone else, That distance from a thing doesn't mean the thing loses its weight. You carry it. You carry it and you walk away, and the only difference is that now you're carrying it somewhere cold and quiet instead of somewhere familiar. I thought about that the next morning when I went back to the third observation ring and found him already there. "You were here first today," I said. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Same bunk length problem everyone has." "What?" "The bunks in the visiting officers' quarters," I said. 6 inches too short. Everyone complains." He looked at me with this expression that I would come to recognize, this particular arrangement of his features that meant he was deciding whether to say the true thing or the easier thing. And the true thing was winning the argument, but he wasn't quite sure it should. "I slept fine," he said. "The bunk was fine. He stopped. "I keep waking up and thinking I need to do something, check something, and then I remember there's nothing to check." I nodded. "How long were you active before Selim?" 14 years, he said. "Continuous deployment." 14 years. I did the math without meaning to. He'd have been barely older than a student when he started. He'd have grown up in it, in the discipline and the constant demand, and the weight of other people's lives being something you carry on your shoulders until it just becomes part of your posture. "That's a long time to be needed," I said. He turned to look at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him yet, something that opened a little, like a hinge working after long disuse. Surprised. Not offended, not defensive, just surprised. The way you're surprised when someone says a true thing in exactly the right shape. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Yeah, it is." We watched the drift for a while. A mining shuttle was making its slow approach arc toward the eastern docking collar, its running lights blinking amber and white in the half-dark. "What did you run from?" he asked. Not prying, just the frontier reciprocity. You answer, I answer. "A life that fit perfectly," I said. Which sounds like the wrong thing to run from, but something about perfect-fitting things, they can become their own kind of trap. I kept waking up inside this very neat, very comfortable, very correct life, and feeling like I was on the wrong side of glass. He didn't offer consolation. He didn't say, "I know what you mean," or "that makes sense," or any of the things that are kind but are really just sounds you make to fill the space. He just stayed with it. Let it be what it was. That, I would come to understand, was one of the things about him. He didn't hurry feelings along. He let them exist at their actual size. "The wrong side of glass," he repeated. "Like watching your own life from outside it," I said. He looked at the transparisteel between us and the drift. "I think I've been on both sides of that," he said, "and I'm not sure which one is worse." Selim Station had, in its 43 years of operation, accumulated the particular character that frontier outposts develop when they're lived in long enough. It wasn't beautiful. The original construction had been purely functional, a set of rotating habitat rings attached to a central operations core, with docking infrastructure bolted on in stages as traffic increased. The walls in the older sections had been repainted so many times that the color was essentially the fossil record of everyone who tried to make it feel less like a machine. There were murals in some corridors, amateur ones, made by people with more feeling than skill, which somehow made them better. Someone had painted a landscape in Corridor G of the old Eastern Ring, rolling hills and a sky in 3 shades of blue, Earth-adjacent but not quite Earth. I'd stood in front of it more than once. The station's population was around 2,000 at any given time, but the permanent residents, people who'd been here longer than a single posting, numbered maybe 300. We were the ones who knew the good windows and the bad meals and the names of the maintenance crew, and which of the docking controllers had a tendency to clear landing approaches too early. Vasek started learning the station the way he'd probably learned every posting, methodically, carefully, without appearing to. I noticed him in different sections at different times over the first week, not lost but deliberately exploring. He had that quality, a strategic curiosity. He was mapping the place internally, understanding its structure and its rhythms. I didn't approach him again. That's not how it works on the frontier. You let people find their own footing. But on the fourth day, he found me in the commissary at the 1200 meal, looked at the seat across from me in a way that was more question than statement, and I nodded, and he sat down. "You know everyone here," he said, "not a question." "Most of the permanent crew," I said. "Why?" "Because they all know you. I've been watching." He paused. "That sounds strange. I don't mean it strangely." "I know," I said. "You're doing what you do in any new environment, building a situational picture, identifying the network nodes." He looked at me steadily. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly it." "I did the same thing when I arrived," I said. "The impulse doesn't go away when you leave military service." "You were military." 4 years, Ground Operations Survey Division. I watched something shift in his expression, a small realignment, a category update. "I'm not running from that," I added. "I finished my term and made a choice. Different thing." "What made you stay out here after your term?" I thought about how honest to be. Then I thought about driftlight, about the color that didn't have a word until I invented one, about the particular quality of silence at the third observation ring at 0500, when the amber cycle was just beginning to shift toward white. "The frontier changes what you think you need," I said. "You realize you can live on less than you thought, and somehow that's not a loss. It's more like you've been carrying furniture your whole life, and you finally put it down and notice your arms." He was quiet for a moment, looked at his coffee, the synthetic kind that tastes like a description of coffee. He'd already identified it for what it was. I could tell by the way he drank it, not with expectation, just as fuel. "I don't know what I need anymore," he said, quietly, like admitting something he'd been working up to. "That's okay," I said. "Is it?" "Beats being certain about the wrong thing." He looked up at me, the half-smile that wasn't quite a smile yet, and then something further, something I hadn't seen yet. A kind of consideration, like he was deciding whether this was a person worth the risk of being honest with. He decided. "I haven't talked to anyone," he said. "Since Veridian, not really. The counselors and the review boards, that's different. That's," he made the gesture again, the one that dismissed a sentence before it finished. "I mean talked." "I know what you mean," I said, and I did. He nodded. "You heard about Veridian." "I looked it up," I said, no apology for it, "when I saw your name on the manifest. And I understood why you were here," I said. "And I didn't think it was any of my business. But since you're telling me now, I'll say, what I read was that you made impossible decisions correctly, and then you spent 6 days making sure you hadn't missed anyone, and that both of those things together are what broke something." He went very still. That particular stillness, where the body is catching up to something the mind just processed. "Not broke," he said after a long moment. Everyone keeps saying broken. The psych team, the board, trauma response, disruption to normal function, all of it. And I understand the clinical language, I do. He pressed both hands flat on the table, a small, involuntary gesture. "I don't feel broken. I feel like I'm missing something. Like something got used up and I don't know what to put back in its place." I looked at him across the synthetic coffee table in the Selam Station commissary, under the flickering of the light panel in the third row that maintenance kept scheduling and rescheduling. "Hope," I said. He looked at me. "That's what gets used up," I said. "When you pour everything into something and it doesn't, when the outcome doesn't match what it cost, that's what empties out. The hope. And then you don't know what's powering you anymore, because you've been running on it your whole life without knowing what it was called." The commissary was not quiet. There were a dozen other people there, the low background hum of conversation and equipment, the clatter of the serving window. But in the particular space between us, something had gone very still. He said, "How do you get it back?" "I'm still working on that," I said honestly. But I think you start by finding something small, something that doesn't have to carry the weight of everything, something that just, I thought for a moment. Just the drift light, I said. Just the color the asteroids turn in the early shift. Something that exists for no reason except that it's there. He considered that. Then he said slowly, drift light. My word, I said. For the violet amber color the drift turns in the early morning. There wasn't a word for it, so I made one. Something moved in his expression. Not the almost smile this time. Something more interior than that. Something that looked, very faintly, like recognition. I used to do that, he said. Make words. When I was before, deployments get long. You start naming things that don't have names. What did you call them? He shook his head slowly, not refusing, remembering. Hull hush, he said. The sound of a ship under thrust when everything's working right. This specific low vibration. Hull hush. A pause. Starache. The feeling when you've been in transit for long enough that the sight of stars outside the viewport starts to feel personal, like they know you. Starache, I repeated. Hull hush, he said. We looked at each other across the table. Two people who made words for things that didn't have them yet. Vasek, I said. Elan, he said. Elan, I said. And there it was, the actual beginning of something. Not the moment at the viewport that had been an introduction. Not the moment he sat down that had been an approach. This was the beginning. Right here in the commissary over synthetic coffee with the light panel flickering in the third row. Two people handing each other their real names. The weeks that followed were not a romance in the traditional sense of the word. Nothing swept or sudden. No declarations. The frontier doesn't accommodate that kind of thing. It's too practical, too present tense, too aware of its own impermanence. But we began to build something. The way you build on the frontier, which is, carefully, with available materials, without assuming the structure will hold forever but building it right anyway. We had breakfast together most mornings. Not every morning. He had physical rehabilitation sessions 3 mornings a week, part of the recovery program, and I had early duty rotations on Tuesdays and Fridays. But the other mornings, the third observation ring, the drift light, the synthetic coffee. We started bringing better coffee. There was a small shop in the station's commercial ring run by a woman named Torin Dahl, who sourced actual ground beans from a supplier 2 relays away and charged accordingly. It was worth it. Real coffee changed the quality of morning in a way that's hard to overstate. We talked. That was the word for it. Talked, in the sense of saying true things to each other over a period of time, in the sense of letting someone know you incrementally rather than all at once, in the sense of creating a vocabulary between two people that belongs only to them. I learned about his family, a sister on Meridian Base, a mother who died while he was in his 2nd year of active service, a father he described in careful neutral language that told me everything about the relationship without actually saying anything. I learned about his first command, how young he'd been, how the responsibility had felt less like weight and more like clarity, like being given something to organize yourself around. I learned about the specific quality of his grief for the people he'd lost at Veridian, which wasn't survivor's guilt exactly. He'd been precise about that. But something more specific. The grief of a leader who carries his people and can't put them down even after they're gone. He learned about me, about the life that had fit too perfectly. About the person I'd been in it, competent, present, performing all the correct functions of a life without generating any of the heat. About the moment I'd stood in the kitchen of a perfectly comfortable apartment on Meridian Station and understood, suddenly and without drama, that I had been managing my existence rather than living it. About the survey posting I'd applied for the next day. About the strange, specific piece of arriving somewhere with nothing expected of you. He asked once, "Do you miss it, the life you left?" "I miss the ease of it," I said. "I don't miss the person I was becoming inside it." "Who were you becoming?" "Efficient," I said. Optimized, very smooth at the surface and not much underneath. He nodded. I understand that, he said. From the other direction, I had everything underneath and nothing smooth at the surface. What does that mean? It means he stopped, started again. I was very good at being needed, very good at being the person who makes decisions in the dark with bad information and keeps everyone else's fear managed. But I couldn't, he put his coffee down. I couldn't be with anyone, not in the way that doesn't have a mission attached. Every relationship I had was through the framework of service. My crew, my officers, my responsibility. Take the framework away, and I didn't know how to be present for someone without the mission structure holding it in place. And now, I asked. He looked at me steadily. I'm trying to learn something I probably should have learned at 20. You were deployed at 20, I said. Fair, he said. The incident happened in the 6th week. I say incident because that's the word that ended up in the duty log, but it wasn't dramatic, really. It just revealed something, the way certain moments do, without intending to. A Keth diplomatic shuttle arrived at Selam Station on the 43rd day. Keth representatives weren't unusual on the frontier. Since the Viridian Passage, relations between the Galactic Union and the Keth Confederacy had been in a delicate, provisional negotiation phase, and stations like ours functioned as informal meeting points, neutral ground that carried less symbolic weight than the major hubs. 3 Keth officials and their support staff, docking berth 7, transit stop on their way to somewhere more significant. I handled the entry clearance, standard process, biometric verification, cargo manifest review, intent declaration, professional, routine. What wasn't routine was that I saw, in the station's main concourse, Elan Vasic step off an elevator and then stop completely. The Keth officials were crossing the concourse on their way to the diplomatic transit lounge. They weren't the Keth who had attacked the Viridian Passage convoy. The separatist faction was a distinct group, politically and officially separate from the Keth Confederacy proper. That distinction was real and important and documented. But they were Keth. And he had stopped. I watched him from 30 meters away. He stood very still, that extreme stillness I'd seen at the commissary table, the one where the body is catching up. His hands were at his sides. His face was nothing. Absolutely nothing. A perfect controlled blank that was more alarming than any expression because it was being maintained deliberately at visible cost. The Keth officials passed, didn't notice him. Their translator murmured something and one of them laughed, a short sound that carried across the concourse's ambient noise. Elan didn't move until they were through the transit lounge doors and those doors had closed. Then he moved toward the nearest corridor, not toward me. I gave him 3 minutes, then I followed. He was in the side corridor that connected to the emergency maintenance shaft access. Not a dramatic choice of location, just the nearest quieter space. Standing with one shoulder against the wall, head bowed, both hands pressed against the back of his neck in that posture that means I am keeping myself together with the last of the available material. I didn't say anything immediately, I just stood there. Nearby but not hovering, present without pressing. After a moment he said, without looking up, I know they're not, I know the distinction. I know you know, I said. It was just the silhouettes, the vocal pattern, he stopped, his jaw tightened. This is not, I don't do this. You're doing it right now, I said. That's just a fact, not a criticism. He looked up at me then, something raw in his face, exposed in a way I hadn't seen before, the smooth surface of his discipline showing its seams. I spent 6 days in that debris field, he said. I can still the light in there. The way the debris was catching the local star, everything was red. He stopped, breathed. I dream in red, since Viridian, that's what I didn't tell the psych board. I stood with that, let it be what it was. You didn't tell them because I'm trying to go back, he said. The first time he'd said it directly, back to active command, And if I tell them the dreams are still happening, they'll extend the hold. He looked at me with something that might have been asking for judgment. Which is probably the right call. But I need to go back. He stopped. You need to be needed again, I said quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. Then something in him shifted, not collapsed exactly. Something more like settling, like a structure finding its center. I don't know if that's all of it, he said. I keep telling myself it's not. I keep telling myself I want to go back because I'm good at it and they need good officers and the work matters. And all of that's true. A pause. But also, a pause. Yes, I need to be needed. I don't know who I am without someone counting on me. That's not a shameful thing, I said. It feels like weakness. Needing purpose doesn't make you weak, I said. It makes you someone who was built for something. The problem isn't the needing. The problem is when the only way you know how to meet it puts you back inside the thing that hollowed you out. He was quiet for a long time. I'm not telling you not to go back, I said. I'm not saying that. I don't have any claim on what you do with your life, and I know what it means to you, and I know you're probably right that they need you. But he said, waiting. But I think you're running towards something the same way you ran towards Salem. Not because there's nothing there. Because there's something here you're not ready to face yet. He looked at me. You told me, I said, that you don't know how to be present for someone without a mission structure holding it in place. And then you've spent 6 weeks being present with me, without a mission, without a framework, without anyone counting on you, and it's been, I stopped, chose the right word. It's been good, hasn't it? Very quietly, yes. That's the thing you're not ready to face, I said. That you can do this. That you can exist and have worth outside of what you're able to accomplish for other people. Because if you face that, you have to figure out what it means. And that's harder than going back. He stood against the wall in the maintenance corridor with the amber maintenance light above us and the distant hum of the station's environmental systems. And he looked at me with an expression I'd never quite seen on a person before, like someone who has been handed the exact right tool for a repair they've been attempting badly for a long time. And the relief and the grief of it are arriving simultaneously. You're very good at this, he said. At what? Saying true things, he said, in exactly the shape they need to be. I had a lot of time to think, I said. 11 months of driftlight. He almost laughed, the closest he'd come. A short breath through his nose, something that shaped his whole face differently for just a moment. Sierra, he said. Yeah. I don't want to go back yet, he said. I thought I did. I came here telling myself I'd use the hold to recover and then push for reinstatement. But I don't, he stopped, breathed. I'm not ready, you're right, I'm not. Okay, I said. That should feel like defeat, he said. Does it? A long pause. No, he said, that's the strange part, it doesn't. Winter on Salem isn't winter in any real sense. There are no seasons. Only the cycling of the station's environmental system and the slow drift of the local sun relative to the viewport angles. But there's a period in the station calendar that the permanent crew call winter anyway, when the star they're anchored near goes into its low-output phase, and the ambient light through the viewports drops to a particular cool gray that feels like December whether you have a December or not. It was winter by that reckoning, when Elan came to find me in Corridor G. I was standing in front of the mural, the rolling hills, the three-shade blue sky. I did this sometimes, just looked at it, let myself feel the homesickness it produced even though the place it depicted wasn't anywhere I'd been. Grief for a place that didn't exist is a very specific kind of feeling. I'd never tried to explain it to anyone. Mostly because the few times I'd attempted it, people had looked at me the way you look at someone who may be slightly unhinged. He stood next to me and looked at it. Where is that? He asked. Nowhere, I said. Someone painted a place they wanted to exist. He looked at it for a while. The hills, the sky, the light that seemed to come from exactly the right direction. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about finding something small, something that doesn't have to carry the weight of everything." "Yes. I've been thinking that maybe the problem I have," he said, "is that I don't know how to value things that aren't strategic, mission relevant, useful in some capacity. I look at the driftlight and I think it's beautiful, and then some part of me immediately asks what use it is, and he made the gesture. I've been asking the wrong question my whole life." "What's the right question?" I said. "Maybe just is it real?" he said. "Is this real, this corridor, this mural, this—" a pause. "You." I turned to look at him. He was looking at the mural, not at me, his profile in the cool gray winter light of the station. "You're the first person in 14 years, he said, "who has talked to me like I'm a person and not a function. The first person who has made me feel like being here, just here, not useful, not productive, not serving anything is enough." He stopped. "More than enough." "Elon," I said. "I know," he said quickly. "I know I'm not, this isn't, I don't know how to do this. The other thing, the not mission version, I'm aware of that." "I'm not asking you to know," I said. He looked at me then, finally fully. The way he'd looked at the drift on the first morning, but different, not searching outward now, finding something. "You need someone to stand beside you," he said. Not a question, not an offer, just an observation, the way he observed things with that precise attention. "Someone who will be there without a reason they have to explain, just beside you." I looked at him, held the moment. "And you," I said, "need a reason to hope again." He went very still. "Yeah," he said after a long moment. "Yeah, I think I do." "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. We stood in front of the mural of the impossible place for a while longer, in the winter light, not saying anything, not needing to. Two people who'd come to the edge of everything and found each other there. Who'd arrived broken in different ways and were figuring out, slowly and imperfectly, how to be unbroken. Not fixed, not solved, just hopeful again. The corridor hummed around us. The station breathed. Somewhere in the drift, a rock caught the light and went briefly, beautifully violet. Drift light. Still the most real word I'd ever invented. The first time he reached for my hand, we were back at the third observation ring. Early shift, amber cycle, the drift doing its slow, ancient rotation. He didn't say anything about it. He just stood next to me, and after a moment, his hand was next to mine on the viewport sill. And then it was around mine. And then we were standing there watching the asteroids drift through the dark with our hands held in the amber light of morning. I didn't say anything either. We watched a chunk of rock the size of a house catch the light and go amber, then copper, then that violet you can't name unless you've been here long enough. I'd been here long enough. He was getting there. "Starake," he said quietly. "Drift light," I said. "Hull hush," he said. The station around us, the vibration under our feet, everything working the way it should. His hand was warm, that was the small detail. His hand was warm, and mine was in it, and outside the viewport the universe continued its incomprehensible business, and we were two small people at the edge of everything, standing together. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was. In the specific vocabulary of this life we were both learning to live, exactly enough.